Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to see you. We are back with another episode of IGDA Gist Game Industry Side Takes. And today we have Andrew Pappas, who is the owner and CEO of RenGen Consulting. And he is going to talk with us about marketing basics and some really important keys to what you need as an indie developer so that you have a solid foundation. So, hi, Andrew.
Hey, Suzanne, how's it going? And thank you so much for having me here today.
Great. And why don't you give us a little bit of your background? How did you start Rundown?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. So basically, it all started. Let's see, how far do I want to go back here? I'll keep it short. I went to school for filmmaking, and I quickly realized as an independent filmmaker, you need to learn how to market yourself. So from that realization, I then made a career in marketing. But even throughout that period of time and everything, and even since I was a kid, I always had a fascination, love for games. And at one point, it clicked to me where it's like, there's, I'm sure there's a way that these two can come together. And what I started to realize after that fact was that games are cool and all, but I just really loved the industry as a whole, how welcoming it was and everything, especially with the uprise of indie games. And that was just so intriguing for me. And it was felt like this is a place I really need to belong. And then I quickly realized that, hey, a lot of people are kind of going through the same process I did, realizing, hey, as an independent filmmaker, but now as an independent game creator, you need to learn how to market yourself. And sometimes it can be very challenging. So that's kind of that when I made that realization, formed RenGen. That's been about like 6, 7 years now. But that's how I came about forming the company, is because I understood and realized that it can be really hard to know how to market yourself, market your product, and everything. So I created that company out of the kind of the sheer love and passion of the games industry, especially for all indie devs and studios out there.
That's awesome. I really love that story. I love that you realized, hey, if I'm going to be a filmmaker, I need to be able to market myself. And that's definitely when you moved into games. We have the exact same challenges on this side. So that's awesome. Tell me a little bit about how you came to focus on indie developers, and so tell me a little bit about do you play indie games? Do you have a favorite?
So I guess I got into it more when it's like this is back in the age when like, geez, I remember when like Minecraft first came out and that felt like, or it was considered like an indie game, and here we are today when it's like, oh, it's a Microsoft company now, or product, right? But titles like that, what is it? I remember I actually when they first toured, what was it, Indie Game the movie? They
Oh
they
yeah.
they they were going around, and a good friend of mine said, "Hey, want to go to Boston to see this movie?" And it was really cool to kind of see that. So I mean, and with things like that project, like Indie Game the movie, and then like that's where a lot of my love came from it, and started seeing these things because again, I mean, I had this like passion and career in marketing at this point already, but to see these things happen really started making that what I was visualizing was a reality, and I could see it happening all around me. In terms of and what was really cool about that is a quick thing here, and I know some people can relate with me on this. I've had lots of conversations where there's a really interesting overlap between like the film industry and the game industry. But the biggest one I noticed is that just from my own personal experience, is just the gaming industry as a whole entirely is much more welcoming than I feel that the film industry is. But I think they're improving in the film industry. And but there was that, but the mediums and stuff and the type of work that goes into is really entertaining. But that said, there's still I think a lot more cool stuff going on in the indie scene, and there always has been, and there always will, which is always really exciting. In terms of favorite games, oh man, I mean, I've always been a big fan of like Final Fantasy as a whole, like that whole IP. I don't know. I just am. For indie games, I mean, and how often do I play them? I mean, I don't really play games that much anymore. I have a family with three kids, and
Oh,
I'm
wow.
just busy in general. So I try to make time. I try to set up systems right by my workstation. So when I'm done, when I'm unplugged for the day, I try to plug back in with the game. It's a lot harder than it sounds, even though I'm trying to reduce the amount of friction it takes to play games. And then my kids always take over screens and devices that allow me to play games. So I don't have a favorite. I'm trying to even think of the last one I played. Honestly, it was probably someone I've been working with that I'm playtesting a lot because it's a JRPG game, which I'm a big fan of RPGs in general, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. So that's the last one I could say. But otherwise, don't have much time as much as I would like for that. But hopefully that can I'll make more effort in the long run.
Well, three kids, that's a lot of humans to finagle who all want. I'm sure if you pull the game up, the next thing you know, they're playing it. So
Yeah.
it's just what happens. So tell me a little bit about this, the focus you have on creating a sort of foundation for marketing for indie game developers.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're asking that question because I think this is a really important thing. That I mean, we discuss about it, but I think we look at it from different angles and perspectives that can sometimes not necessarily be overwhelming, but can kind of steer things in different directions. So a lot of the process, whenever I'm working with anybody, is always, and it almost doesn't matter to what capacity. To some degree, though it comes down to really understanding at the core what is most important and the reason why you're making games, right? Because there's a few reasons that can come up where I think the one that a lot of us are at least aware of and that shouldn't be a main reason or drive is to make money. Because no matter how you slice it in this industry or any industry, if you want to make money, um, generally there's the whole intent behind it. Like, okay, that's great, but is it something you actually enjoy? Because what you'll find out if it's just for that reason alone, you'll probably not succeed at it. And if you do, you have to work really, really, really hard. I know people in different industries that like the money that they're making, but they also put in so much work and effort and everything else to get make that happen. But in a lot of cases, it's just not the right intent. But that one I think everybody's familiar with. What I think also happens is they lead into with, oh, I'm really passionate about this and I really want to do this or whatever. But like really going a little bit further, why are you passionate about? What are some of these aspects? And these are a lot of type of foundational questions I ask a lot of people that I work with, because it can go a little bit beyond than just simply the passion. It's understanding like what are important values that you might have. What's your mission? What are some of your goals? And from these questions, you can start kind of laying out a little bit of what does this path look like? What's the kind of direction you want to take? Like, what kind of games do you want to make? Is it because you really like those games, or is it because you think there's a need in the market for that? Like, what are kind of these defining reasons for these things? Because when you start looking at things a little bit differently in that sense, it not only looks into the passionate side of things, which is really important because you still need that motivation and drive, but you also look at it more from like a business perspective. Like, hey, is there a need for another 2D platformer? In terms of if I want to make a commercial product, there might not be, but maybe you have a certain new take or something else that could provide more value than what's currently available in the market. So those are like some of the foundational stuff, and it can go a lot deeper too in terms of I mentioned some things about the values. and those at face value might not necessarily come up too much, but if like you're all about working and slowly creating a team that's always putting out 100% 5 days a week or whatever, that's great. That's also very ambitious and could lead to potential burnout. So that's just one example of many in terms of what it comes down to values, how you're structuring yourself. How do you create a work culture that works with you in line if you're doing this full time or if you hope to do it full time? um, what are you doing then to take care of yourself in the meantime? How are you, so again, a lot of these foundational aspects, and this is just one part of it, and it can lead into so many other things in terms of the content you create, the style, what type of community you want to have. That's why asking yourselves a lot of these questions and at least giving you a little bit of direction is a good place to start. And it doesn't mean you have to, it's set in stone. You can always pivot, you can always change. I mean, your views and outlook and values your mission may change in time, and I would expect it to, but giving yourself a direction is really important in terms of going on that journey.
That's really great. Those are really good tips. So tell me a little bit more about the value piece. Like what kind of expectations should people have in marketing their game when they really value, let's say, their their value isn't in gameplay, their value is maybe in um, art, right? Like
Mm.
they want to have the most beautiful art for their game. So how does that like filter into the marketing piece?
It's a really great question because I think sometimes what happens is you might have some people that say, I want to do this type of game. And again, it could be out of just your passion. There's a need for it and other things, right? What we just mentioned. But in your example, which I think is a great one, is like, hey, look, maybe I want to be focused more art. Well, what I would say to that, or any area that you want to focus more towards, it's really about playing more to your strengths. So, and playing to your strengths and also being mindful of what resources you have available. So, meaning if you're really big into art and game design or even corporate like development or all those other, I mean, there's options to help you with those things out there. There's lots of things to consider, but at the core of it, you really just want to play, especially if you're starting out, you really want to play into those strengths a lot more. And this, I've seen this from experience. I've seen this and I've heard this, and like across the board, this is what I see pretty consistently. Play to your strengths, because what can happen is if you don't do that, it could then you're creating something that's not necessarily true to you. It's not going to be as good as it could possibly be. And there's where a lot of problems can lie and why things aren't successful or why they may fail or why they might not meet your expectations. But let's carry this on a little bit. Let's say the person who's like, oh, I really want to play into this for art, but I would like it to be that. If you want it to be a little bit more than what the art can cater to, say, let's say something beyond a visual novel, right? If we're doing something a visual novel based because you're very art focused, that might be a really good fit for that type of a project, and that's okay. But if you want something more than that, then again, now it's about knowing, reassessing like what your resources are. Do you have funds in place? Do you have a unique enough project that you can pitch to maybe others that are willing to back you and support you through by working with you, or a publisher that could do that? Really look into what resources are available, and then you can start to get a better sense of, hey, is the kind of game that I want to make in line with what's available to me, and also being somewhat realistic. It's great to go above and beyond, but you want to set some form of realistic goals in the respect that you know don't go too beyond, but don't sell yourself short either. Don't set goals that are easily accomplished, because you're not, you still might fall short of what your expectations may be. But that's what I would say to that. Focus on your strengths, but then also consider what your resources are or what's out there available to try to make something that might be a little bit different, that doesn't necessarily play straight up to your strengths. But at the core, play to your strengths. whether that's you as an individual or a team of people, play to everybody's strengths. That's how you're going to make a much better product in the long run, I would say.
I really love that. And I love that you're talking about like being true to yourself, and it can't just be about like, I want to make money, because that generally doesn't work. And, there has to be a passion behind it. And it's one of the things that I love the most about this industry is the amount of passion people put into their project. And from what I'm hearing from you is that being true to yourself, being passionate about what you're doing is what's really going to make you a success.
Yeah, no, I definitely say that's a big motivator and factor. I think too, though, it's important to be aware of it can't solely be passion. There's a level and a degree in which you kind of have to maybe sometimes ask yourself hard questions. And going back to the example that we were talking about a moment ago, let's say that person who's really big on art and really wants to focus art, but they want to make like, a, a very artistic style 4X grand strategy game, right? um, that might be very overambitious. And I don't care if you're straight up an artist that's very ambitious and learning a lot about like other things like development and things like that. I would say, I don't care how much passion you have. I think that would be a very, very tough hurdle mountain to climb. It's not to say that that person who wants to tackle something like that can't do it. I'm just saying there's a lot of other types of projects that are probably going to be a little bit more. So it's all relative, right? And it's again, it's also being true to yourself, where it's like if you really want to make that, is again reassessing your resources and everything else. Is that something, just because you have that a lot of passion doesn't necessarily guarantee you're good, because it can run out. And that's the other thing. And we don't want that to happen. But it's just again being realistic and asking yourself tough questions, and does it really make sense? Because if you're approaching this more than a hobby perspective, you need to start kind of thinking with the business mindset. Even if it's a small project starting out, if it ends up getting to a point that it's even the slightest bit beyond a hobby, then start asking yourself other questions and kind of treat yourself like a business a little bit. Now, I'm not saying you have to like start getting a tax ID number or whatever else, or establish a trade name or all these, I'm just saying think with that mindset, because I think it will lead you a little bit better than if you're straight out going with passion.
So give me an idea of a business mindset. What's kind of one or two foundational pieces of that?
Hmm. I mean, I would say some of it would go back, I think, to just even some simple things that we're all, I think, familiar with to a degree. And that's coming down to like some just basic market research. And what that can really come down to is seeing like, a lot of what we kind of do at first is on a very high, simple level is, hey, we see what other games are out there that are popular, right? So regardless of what those may be, saying, okay, what do you see that they've done that works, right? In terms of, and I would say focus on, yeah, definitely focus on the game more than anything. Because I mean, there's tactics they can use and all these other things, but you can get really caught in the weeds on that stuff. And there a lot of times it's just anecdotes. They're not necessarily going to be insightful to what will work for you.
Mm.
But to start from anywhere, I would say market research key, and you're looking for little things like what are they doing, but also a big important part is there's, I would say, two areas. One is looking for pain points of players, and a great way to do this is look at successful Steam games and then look at all the reviews and see which ones are negative. Because a lot of times people will call out, be like, "Hey, I like this game, but," and in some situations they may list information that, like, especially with like more in successful, I air quote successful because it's all relative, but let's say, but we're more well known or seen that they performed well indie games. and look at titles like that. And if there are, like, I think a great example here is like Vampire Survivors, right? This is a fairly common, we're all familiar with, but there has been a lot of other uh, Vampire Survivor games after after that. And can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I couldn't hear myself. I apologize. Anyways, there's a lot of other Vampire Survivor games after that. And what they did was they just iterate upon the original Vampire Survivors that came out because a lot of people are saying, "Oh, I would like this a little bit differently," or those developers said, "You know what? Cool game, but I would have thought it would be cool if I could do this. And I already know that there's a lot of value there for people because a lot of people like the game. So then they iterated upon that to make something else. So those are some areas that you could go about. Like I would say a key foundation from a marketing perspective is to find out if what you're making and what's happening in that space, what are people already doing well? And if they're already doing really well there, how can you add even more value? That's what a lot of developers did with Vampire Survivors. They found out ways to add more value, or other people can look at what are the pain points that people are talking about. What would they're saying, I like this game, but oh my gosh, if I had this in the game too, that would just make it 10 times more awesome. Well, those are like gold nuggets that people are dropping. And I would say that's probably the biggest foundational thing to do. And a lot of people don't go through those extra steps to find these things that can be extremely helpful and at least help you out a little bit more on your journey and with the potential success that it could have by addressing these things that players want.
I think that's a really great tip because you're right. You can easily see what to do, right? And it can give you ideas that you didn't even have about how to make this game better. And I think that's a really clever idea to go into Steam and kind of look at the bottom reviews.
Yeah, and
That's
there's
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's other things that can be done similar to that too, but I would say that's probably going to be one of the best ones out there. Because again, I mean, we're all humans, and what it comes down to is, as humans, we operate in like there's one way of looking at it, right? But we operate is what causes us pain and what causes us comfort or fulfillment. And if there's more pain than comfort, then we're going to focus on how do we get rid of the pain, right?
Right.
So it's very very basic, and but this mindset, I guess, looking at things that way is applicable to just about everything we do, especially games. So like another word for pain is like friction. If people are having a lot of friction when they're playing the game or they don't understand something, especially like if you're seeing this in play testers and they're saying this and it keeps coming up, don't just ignore it because oh it's too much work to do to then correct that thing, especially if a lot of people are saying it. But on the flip side, you also want to be careful that sometimes you're making a game that's a little bit different, and just because players are used to having like a dodge feature, that doesn't mean you need to now put a dodge feature in because that could completely offset the whole project in terms of what your initial vision was. But still, well, my point is understanding what the comfort and pain, or we should call it like a value. How do you add more value to something that already exists, or how can you address pain points that players have in your game as it relates to that genre in that market?
That's a really great tip. I love that. I love that strategy. And so, before we end, do you have any like last thoughts about about people that are starting out, people that maybe have started and need a little bit of support? What do you have to say to them?
Yeah, I would say regardless of where you are on your journey, I think an important thing to look at is really look at what your vision is, what your values are, whether not necessarily, I mean, I feel that they relate, but not necessarily just as your personal values, but what are your values for, your company, your studio or whatever. And if you're not thinking about doing anything like that, that's okay too. But what are your values in terms of how they relate and are presented or represented in your game? And there's no right or wrong answer to this, by the way, right? But really look at what your values are, look at what your vision is, and ask yourself if that is aligning with your product and everything. Is that with your game? Is that aligning with your objectives and your goals in the future? And kind of write down what this mission is or what this vision is. Like, people don't go through these exercises at all, as much as I think they should need to. And I'm not just talking about games; I'm talking about across all industries. But what this does is, again, gives you that guiding point, so you can work towards it, and then you can change it as you go and everything else. I think, and plus, if you have a team, you want to know what that vision is and make sure it's unified across your studio, because if not, and this happens so much, if one person thinks of the project one way and the other, but you both think that you know what it is, and if you just ask them. That's another tip. Just ask other members of the studio, is this, or share what your vision is, and ask them, is this what you pictured it as too? And if they say no, then you need to have more conversations and get everybody on the same page. So I would say that's one. Look at what your goals, visions, and the kind of mission is, and then make sure it's unified across your team, whether it's contractors or whatever. Just make sure it's in place. Trying to think of another one. I mean, that was a key thing, but also, like, just don't do the work in finding out what it is that people really want to play, in terms, and it's not saying like, because just anything. I mean, just, but what I mean by that is, again, going back to the market research, finding out what are some of these pain points, or areas where, like, hey, look, I think a lot more value could be added here, because of, and you can probably be justified in your reasons, and then just make sure you validate that with, like, maybe you pitch the ideas of, could be friends, other people, whatever the case may be. Just take some steps to make sure, to validate that concept, and then continue to validate what you think would be a really good idea or is really adding more value. But yeah, I think those are kind of the key things, and kind of summarizes some of the things that we talked about earlier too. So
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and to give us this really great information about how to think about marketing, how to think about your company, business strategies. I know you also have a podcast. What's the name of your podcast?
yeah, my podcast is called Indie Game Movement, and it's about the marketing and business of indie games. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we talk about, similar to our conversation here today, but so much more as well. So if you're interested in any kind of the topics that we talked about today or more, you can definitely tune into Indie Game Movement, and that's available basically wherever you listen to podcasts. I'd say a majority of the popular ones, and a few others. So if you listen to podcasts, I would say go to wherever you do, and check out Indie Game Movement.
Cool. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I
I
have
really appreciate it.
one more quick thing too. As a uh, for anybody, all your listeners and stuff, if interested, on my website at rengenmarketing.com, if you sign up for the mailing list, you will automatically get a free marketing plan template. So
Oh,
you
cool.
just sign up, it gets delivered to you right away. You can do whatever you want with it, copy, paste, whatever, but it's a whole template that really outlines your whole kind of marketing plan, in kind of like a good fashion. So gives you a good guide and structure to work with. So again, for anybody listening, if they think that would be helpful, that's available to them too.
That's brilliant. So Rengen Marketing, RENGEN Marketing, you can get a template if you sign up for the mailing list, which is great.
Yep.
So
Yep. That's it.
thank you very much. Thank you for being here with us, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.